Okay, everybody, welcome to our series of lectures on the Task 1 General Letter. There have been several requests that I put together a lecture series that covers the General Letter for the IELTS exam. There are students who are studying the IELTS exam for immigration purposes, or they are trying to get their licensing done and they need the IELTS exam to prove their English level. Or sometimes people are doing it for a job in their own country where they need some type of proof of their English level. So I put together this series of lectures that are going to teach you how to do the general letter exactly. We're broken down into three different sections. In the first section, we're going to cover the theory of how you do the general letter. And then in the second section, we're going to go through 3 or 4 examples that demonstrate the application of the theory. And then in the third section, I'm going to do 2 or 3 letters live, where I'm going to pull up the question and then write the question live and explain it to you part by part as I'm going through it. And hopefully by the time we reach the end, you'll be all set for being able to do a great job on the IELTS General Letter Task 1. All right, so let's get started. So you already know the basic requirements, but for some people, if this is your first time, I'm going to go through it very, very quickly. You're going to get asked a question, and you have to respond to a letter request. You have 20 minutes to write it, and you have to write a minimum of 150 words. All right, now if you know the IELTS exam, you know they give you both parts at the same time, Task 1 and Task 2. Really, for Task 1, you're supposed to spend 20 minutes, and for Task 2, you're supposed to spend 40 minutes. As you know, both the writing tasks for the IELTS exam are handwritten. So sometimes people ask me, what if I have bad handwriting? What if my handwriting doesn't look good? What if, and the simple answer to that is, if you have bad handwriting, you need to improve your handwriting, right? You need to make your handwriting better. That's something you have to work on. That's the difference with the TOEFL exam, which is an exam that is explained, that is done all on the computer. So it's all typing. So you have to make sure that your writing is clear. If the grader can't make out what you're writing, they're not going to interpret for you. So I hope that answers that question for you guys about if I have bad handwriting, what do I do? Write better. You practice it. You can get better at doing it. Basically, you're going to have several different types of completion requests, right? Sometimes they might ask you to gather information, explain what you need or want. It might be some type of very personal correspondence with a friend. They might ask you to express your viewpoint, or you're complaining about something. So these are the basic type of requests that you're going to have. Now, let's look at the different types of communications that you have for the general letter. There are 3 basic types of communications, right? You have the formal format, right? This is normally a formal request, a formal letter request. Like it says here for this one here, you've recently read an advertisement about the equipment that you bought a few days ago. However, the information in the advertisement was wrong. Write a letter to the manufacturer and say, what was the advertisement you read? What information was wrong? What should the manufacturer do about the problem? You see, this is a formal letter. You are writing a formal complaint letter here. There's something wrong. They want you to write a letter and properly complain with the right tone of voice, with the right language, right? So you have a formal letter. You also have what's called the semi-formal format. In all honesty, I really like to think of it between just formal and informal. Semi-formal is a little bit in between, but when you're talking about semi-formal, you are talking basically about a letter where you might be writing to your manager at your company. So it's or you might be writing to a friend about a business opportunity. So it's something that is semi-formal in nature. But really, semi-formal is really basically formal, with maybe only a little bit of informal language here and there, but it's basically a formal setting. Okay. Now, then you have the informal format, right? The informal format. And with the informal format, you're dealing with a letter to a friend, right? They usually are asking you to write a friend, like here, write a letter to a friend telling him or her that you're going back to your hometown and you want to give him or her some furniture. Please say why you thought about him or her, describe the furniture, and suggest a way for him to get it, him or her to get it. This is the informal format. I would say from my experience that the majority of the time it is going to be a formal letter, formal, semi-formal letter, but really is probably close to balanced. But I think that's what they ask more of than not. Okay, but we're going to cover everything because really, when you sit down and take that exam, you can get either three formats: formal, informal, or formal, semi-formal, or informal. In terms of just some general information that you need to know when you're taking the general letter, just some general information. There are always three parts to the letter request. Three parts, right? Look here. Right, look right here. These are the three parts. Why you thought about him or her, that's part one. Describe the furniture, that's part two. Suggest a way for him or her to get it, that's part three. You're always going to have at least three parts that you have to respond to when it comes to the general letter. All right, it's very important that you do exactly what they ask you to do, that you answer exactly the question they want you to answer. You can't, there's no room for interpretation. There are not multiple interpretations of what you're supposed or how you're supposed to respond. Respond exactly to what they are asking you to respond to. I've seen so many examples of students who are really outside the box of the question. They go off on a tangent and start talking about something else or doing something else, and they go off and so they go off in the wrong direction. In terms of word count, you got to make sure you're over 150. But understand that writing a whole lot more doesn't mean you're going to get a better score. People that write really good task one essays usually end up around like 225, around there. You know, sometimes a little bit more, but the minimum is 150. You can do a great job at 175, depending on if you're doing a lot of compounding complex sentences in terms of your sentence structures. And there's no need to put an address. Now, how many parts? This is what's important, because I see so many students that try to write the general letter in one big paragraph. Big mistake. Big mistake. You're not going to get a great score, right? Big mistake. So, how many parts? Well, look here on the screen right here and you'll see there are 5 parts. You have an introduction, which is 1 to 2 sentences. You have point 1 or part 1, 2 to 3 sentences. Point 2 or part 2, 2 to 3 sentences. Point 3 or part 3, 2 to 3 sentences, and a 1-sentence conclusion. Also, you'll see there are the time brackets that you need to be able to write each part in so you can finish on time. It's very important that you are working under the pressure of a clock when you're writing. That is extremely important. If you're not doing that, you are doing it incorrectly. But there are 5 parts. That means there are 5 paragraphs. They're short, but they're 5 parts. All right, here's an example. Like I talked to you about it before. There's part point 1, point 2, point 3. In addition to point 1, point 2, and point 3, before that you have an introduction. After that you have a conclusion. Right? Those are the 5 parts. Now, one thing that's so important for students to do that I don't think you guys really understand, you need to do an outline before you start writing. It is so helpful to have an outline and know what you're going to talk about, the ideas you're going to discuss before you start writing. It makes your writing more organized, and it allows for you to write faster, right? So your outline is you basically are generating the ideas you're going to talk about for part 1, generating the ideas you're going to talk about for part 2, generating the ideas you're going to talk about for part 3. Here's an example of an outline. Here's our question. Write a letter to your friend about your plans to go out with him or her and another friend on a small picnic. Include the following in your letter: where you plan to go, what arrangements you already made, what help you need from your friend with this picnic. Here's an outline. Part 1, where you plan to go, Yellowstone National Park. Part 2, arrangements I made, check the weather, call for the entry fee, reserve the place, order the food. Part number 3, what help do I need? Blankets, drinks, music, driving. Right? I've gone ahead and I've outlined the ideas I'm going to talk about for each part. That's very important, right? That is very, very important. The reason why, if you are, your brain, when you're writing, your brain is going through 2 different things for most of you. Most of you don't outline, and you try to think of ideas and you try to write at the same time. That means that you're putting too much of your energy into thinking about what you want to say and not how you want to say it. How you want to say it is what gets you a good score. But if you're thinking about what you want to say while you're writing, you're not focused on how you want to say it. How you want to say it goes towards the vocabulary choices, the synonym language you choose, the sentence structures, the grammar, the spelling, the structure, right? So outlining gets the ideas out of your head, gets them on paper, and allows for you to focus on how you want to say it while you're writing. Here's another example of an outline. Right, the same thing. You see part 1, part 2, and part 3. It addresses the part 1, part 2, and part 3 in the question. This is an outline. You should be able to do an outline in 1 minute. Practice outlining is something that you practice. So, a review of the structure. Excuse me. We have here, our introduction. Point 1, point 2, point 3, our conclusion, right? That's our basic structure. So, thank you very much. This is the conclusion of part 1 of the introduction to writing the general letter, task number 1. And I look forward to joining you on the next lecture for part 2. All right, so I'll talk to you soon. Take care.